Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, February 12th. Welcome to the Inside Edge. Assuming Ana Lilia Mejia wins the April special election in the 11th Congressional District, she will join a New Jersey congressional delegation that is majority members of color for the first time in state history. It would have 4 Black members, 3 Hispanic members, 1 Asian American member, and then 6 white members. And that would be a pretty significant sea change for a state that really resisted diversifying its congressional delegation for a long time. Obviously, for the first 200 plus years of the state's existence, it had an all white congressional delegation, like most other states around the country. Donald Payne Sr. broke the ceiling for Black New Jerseyans with his election in 1988. He was followed by Bob Menendez in 1992. But they both came from districts that were sort of specifically drawn around the state's historic Black and Hispanic communities. And you could tell that sort of the powers that be for a while there felt like, well, that's enough. Black and Hispanic New Jerseyans deserve their representation in Congress, but they've got them from the districts that sort of were drawn for those communities, and the rest of the state can still have all white representatives. In the 21st century, that has definitely started to change. And I think especially in the past decade, that mentality has really started to change. You obviously saw Bob Menendez ascend to the Senate in 2006. He was followed a few years later by Cory Booker. And then the House delegation has just steadily added more and more members of color. You had Albia Sires, you had Donald Payne Jr., you had Bonnie Watson Coleman, who in 2014 became the first woman of color to represent the state. You had Andy Kim in 2018, becoming the first Asian American congressman, which was an especially impressive achievement given that his district had a very small Asian American community. You had Rob Menendez, LaMonica McIver, Nellie Poe, Herb Conaway, and now most likely Ana Lilia Mejia. You also in the Senate had George Helmy briefly, who's Egyptian American, and then he was replaced by Andy Kim. Part of that change, I think, comes from the fact that the demographics of the state itself are changing. As of the 2020 census, New Jersey was around 52% white. I would be kind of shocked if by the 2030 census, it wasn't majority minority for the first time. That means that there's a more diverse pool of candidates to draw on. And it also means that the electorate across the state, and in a lot of these districts, even majority white ones, is changing. It means that even in areas that are thought of as pretty white, pretty historically white at least, there are significant communities of color. And that's something that Mejia was able to capitalize on last Thursday. She did really well among the pockets of the 11th district that have big Hispanic communities. She won Dover, even though it used to be in Tom Malinowski's congressional district. She won Belleville, even though that was supposed to be sort of home to a turf war between Malinowski and Brendan Gill. She campaigned in Spanish. She did all of these things to activate the Hispanic community, and it clearly really paid off. But that doesn't tell the whole story of her victory either. You look at the map of where she did well, and Hispanic voters are there, but also white voters are there. You can tell she won a lot of majority white towns. If you were a progressive voter in the district, regardless of your ethnic background, you were more likely than not to cast your ballot for Mejia. She did pretty well in the district's Black community as well. You look at sort of the election district level results in the more African-American neighborhoods of South Orange and Maplewood, and she won most of them. That's sort of an interesting result that you saw some echoes of that in the 2025 governor's race when Ras Baraka, aiming to be the state's first Black governor, did well, obviously in the state's Black communities, but also in a lot of Hispanic areas too, which people weren't necessarily expecting. And you saw something of the inverse of that happening last Thursday. And another candidate in the race, Tahisha Way, who was the most prominent Black candidate running, her base was mostly white. You look at where she got votes, it was in mostly white towns. It was in her home of Passaic County. It was in more Jewish towns. She would have been the district's first Black congresswoman, but that was not her predominant base in the election itself. And this is not necessarily a new phenomenon, of course. I mean, Cory Booker, when he won his 2013 Senate primary against several white candidates, won a huge number of white voters, as well as a huge number of Black voters. So this is not something that New Jersey politicians are completely unfamiliar with, but it is something that they need to sort of take into account. And it's something that I think Mejia in particular was able to really use to her advantage. When you combine strong support in individual communities who are excited about the prospect of electing someone from their community for the first time with a broader based support across the district, that can be really potent. That's something that both Mejia and several other very successful politicians of color around the state have used to great effect. And I think it's a lesson that would be interesting to learn as we look ahead to the next two big Democratic primaries in the state, in the 7th district and the 12th district. I'm not going to talk about those today, so you'll have to stick around with me and watch next week's Inside Edge. But until then, happy